Welcome to the Plasma is Life podcast, Professor Jaworski. Thanks for joining us today. Appreciate, as always, your ability to come and talk about plasma with us. Got to say, snazzy coat and tie there. I'm hopeful that this comes out on video as well. Otherwise, I'll have to go into an in-depth description. But I'll just say for now that it's quite colorful. So,
yeah, thanks very much. It is a Polish folk tie, by the way. I just got it from my mom 2 days ago. She mailed it from Poland.
Very nice. Okay, well, you mentioned that Polish background. Talk to us a little bit about your background, where you're from, your education, your current role, what you've been doing.
Yeah, okay, great. So like I said, I was born in Poland. I lived in Poland for the first 6 years of my life. We escaped Poland and I was a refugee in Germany for 3 years. Actually, when we escaped to Germany, we immediately filed paperwork to immigrate to a free country. It took that free country 3 years to process our application. That free country is, of course, that's right, Canada. So we immigrated to Canada when I was 9 years old. I am Canadian. I lived most of my life in Canada. I did my undergraduate degree at Queen's University in beautiful Kingston, Ontario, Canada. I did my first master's degree in philosophy at the University of Waterloo in Waterloo, Ontario. I then went to England. I did a master's degree at the London School of Economics in philosophy and public policy. And then I completed my PhD in something called applied philosophy. And Bowling Green State University in Ohio is the only school in the world that gives out an applied philosophy PhD degree. In practice, it's basically just a philosophy degree. So I'm an ethicist by training. I am now an associate teaching professor at Georgetown University at the McDonough School of Business. I teach undergraduates. I teach business ethics to the undergraduates, and I teach ethical leadership to the MBA students at Georgetown. Spent some time at Brown University. I was a visiting researcher there for a summer, and I've also taught at the College of Worcester in Ohio as well.
Okay.
That's a bit of my background. In terms of my research interests, because maybe this is more important than my personal biography, I study the ethics and the economics of the global plasma industry. That's been my interest since, it's been my primary research interest since at least 2017 and possibly 2016.
Well, you have several published works in the broader field of economics and I guess what you would call commodification overall, and then some more specific stuff that you've been working on with plasma. So just a little bit briefly on some of those.
Yeah, sure. So I have a number of articles that are forthcoming and under review that I think are most important. I've written a lot of public opinion pieces about the topic of plasma, mostly in Canada, but also in England and in the United States as well. Those basically make the case for expanding plasma collection by permitting the commercial industry to operate using the business model of compensating donors for their plasma donations. Academically, the articles that are forthcoming are about the exploitation objection to compensating people for plasma donation. I have one that's forthcoming in a book. It's a chapter in a book about exploitation from Oxford University Press that should be coming out, I hope, at the end of this year. That's my hope. I have another one that just came out in Public Affairs Quarterly. It's about the space for altruism objection to compensating people for plasma donations. And I have a paper with my colleague, William English, that takes a look at the impact or the effect of compensated plasma opportunities on unpaid or non-compensated blood donations in Canada and in the United States.
Yeah. So what was it that tripped your wires a few years ago that triggered your interest in the industry and I guess the entire plasma cycle, as it were, from vein to vein?
Okay, let's go back to 2011 when I was at the College of Worcester. I was teaching a biomedical ethics course, and of course, compensation for plasma is one of the elements that I covered. Being a Canadian and teaching at an Ohio college, I realized that most of Canada's supply of plasma therapies came from or was sourced from American plasma donors. That was way back in 2011. I thought that was really interesting. And so we had a conversation about it in my class. Fast forward a little bit to 2016, and what may seem at first unrelated became really related. So in 2016, one of my MBA students had started a company called Hemios, whose business model was to compensate bone marrow donors using the process of apheresis. So bone marrow donors in the United States, it is legal for them to be compensated, although I don't see an industry cropping up to support that, not yet. My MBA student started the first of its kind company to do that, but the Department of Health and Human Services wanted to change the rules or the regulations to make his business model illegal. So he came running to me and he asked for my support and my help. I was glad to do that. I put a letter together urging the Department of Health and Human Services not to change the rules, not to change the law. I had that letter signed by a number of ethicists and economists, including Nobel Prize winner Alvin Roth, Mario Machis, and a number of others. It was quite a few signatories. I had an opportunity to present that letter in person to the Department of Health and Human Services in a very bizarre and strange meeting. It's just a listening session. Mm-hmm. And for your listeners or viewers, that consists of me just basically talking at the regulator for 30 minutes, and they don't say anything in response. They don't nod, they don't smile, they don't do anything. They just, I guess, given what it's called, it's just a listening session. They just listen. So I said that.
It's interesting that you characterize that as bizarre, because that, to me, that's fairly typical from working in a trade association and dealing with regulators and other government bodies, where, you know, they'll have a listening meeting and they'll just be collecting testimony and opinions and things like that. So, yeah.
Well, this has not been my experience. I've never done anything like that before. Now I know, but I didn't know at the time. So it was very strange, given my experience and my background, to be witness to that. At any rate, the letter was effective, and the Department of Health and Human Services decided not to go forward with this rule change. Now, at the time, I was trying to become more aware of bone marrow donation and related things, and of course, apheresis, plasmapheresis is awfully close to that same process. And that's when I became aware of what was happening in Canada, where there were certain provinces that were moving to ban the use of compensation for plasma collection. Ontario banned it back in 2014. Alberta was considering it then. This was in 2017. They passed the ban. British Columbia passed the ban in 2018. So as I was saying, in 2016, 2017 is when I really looked into the field of plasma, and given my background as a Canadian, I became particularly interested in that topic. I didn't really feel comfortable saying anything publicly until 2 years after doing enough research to be satisfied with the position that I have on this particular topic.
Yeah.
So that's the background. And then since then, by the way, if I may, since then, I have had an opportunity to meet so many patients, and I attend the various, I'll be at the Immune Deficiency Foundation conference. We're recording this, it begins tomorrow. So I'm a panelist at that conference, but I've met so many patients since then. And so my interest has only deepened in this particular area, thanks to the patients that I've met.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting. The Hemios was your gateway into discussing the compensation aspect and the policies behind it. You know, there's a lot of challenges, I think, with what would happen with stem cells, bone marrow. But you know, for us, we were, you know, we frequently are visited by a lot of similar objections, and you know, not just in the United States, or not especially outside of the United States, perhaps, but but certainly in Canada, we've seen that elsewhere around the world too. And I was wondering, from your perspective as an ethicist, some of the main, I guess, ethical objections to compensation, and to the extent that you can tell, are these sort of universalized? Are they all the same in every country, or are there sort of specific ones in specific areas that seem to be more, I guess, troublesome to folks trying to get their head around the issue?
There are always unique factors in the different countries and in the different places. So there are always details that differ, sometimes dramatically, sometimes not so dramatically. So the way that it's set up in different countries, it changes. So Australia, for example, has a private not-for-profit, the Red Cross, that operates their blood and plasma collection system. They allow CSL plasma to operate as a fractionator in Australia. That's where they're from. So they have an interesting mix. Compare that with Canada, for example, where it's a government-funded public organization that is responsible for blood and plasma collection in Canada. It used to be done by the Canadian Red Cross, but in the wake of the tainted blood scandal, and the Canadian Red Cross was removed as a collector of their blood division, no longer operates. In Canada, it's been replaced by a public system. Some countries, parts of Canada, allow a mix of private collection and public collection. Some parts of the world allow that: Germany, Austria, the Czech Republic, Hungary, and of course the United States. They allow sort of parallel collection systems, both commercial and not-for-profit. So those are unique elements in these different countries that will alter the nature of the objections. But broadly speaking, when it comes to the ethics of this issue, I have an acronym that I think captures all of them. It's SSACE: safety, a question of whether or not compensating people for plasma donations is safe; security, meaning security of supply, what sort of system will ensure that we have enough for the patients that need it; altruism, or does compensating people for plasma undermine altruism? Is it compatible or incompatible with altruism? Should people give plasma only from the kindness of their hearts rather than exclusively out of a regard for the thickness of their wallet, or whether or not they're compatible? C is for commodification. Does compensating for plasma donation, does it commodify either the plasma or the person whose plasma it is? And then the final one is E, for exploitation. Does compensation for plasma exploit the donors? So SSACE is the way that I remember these objections, and all of these objections appear over and over in every jurisdiction, regardless of which jurisdiction it is.
I think one of the problems that I've had with the discussion too is that it always seems to be categorical in nature. Like, you can't both donate because you want to feel good about yourself and you get some money to go along with it. It has to be one or the other. And to my mind, this tends to set up a bit of a false dichotomy. And it certainly, it seems to take root in some places whenever we're talking about policy solutions, because it's easier to sort then. But I've always been a little bit, I guess, confused about that idea that you can only do one, and you can only have one motivation to do something. You work because you enjoy working, but you also get paid to do it. You do any number of things in your life. You spend time with your family because they're your family, but also because perhaps you like their company too. So there's a whole bunch of different range of human behaviors where you have a variety of things that make you do what you do.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, the reason why I gave it the acronym of SSACE is because it follows a kind of boat or ship naming convention. So this is the way that we name ships or boats, and SS stands for steamship, right? And I think that these objections, all of them, safety, security, altruism, commodification, and exploitation, are dated. as dated as the steamship. These are concerns that arose in the 1970s and the 1980s that I don't think apply anymore. None of the objections do, right? That's my honest opinion about the ethics of this situation. And your point about multiple motives is really important here. Maybe back in the 1970s or the 1980s, we thought that people could either do something for money or for other considerations, but not both. But even back in the 1970s and the 1980s, we realized that a medical doctor or a nurse who is paid for what they do can also do it out of the kindness of their hearts. I'm a professor, right? Professors and teachers in general, they are paid for what they do, but presumably the better professors or teachers are the ones that do it not just because this is, the way that they can make the most amount of money. And since I'm a philosopher by training, it's kind of not like
right? Yeah.
I did not go into this field in order, out of a regard for the thickness of my wallet. I had other opportunities to do other things. Although I will say that I do teach at a business school right now, and so it is a difference when it comes to payment. However, when it comes to these motives, it's possible for people to be multiply motivated. And the other interesting thing about this particular objection, this is the altruism objection, is that people have not yet bothered to do proper surveys. They have not bothered to ask people, whether or not they're doing this just because of the money. It's an assumption. An assumption that, in my judgment, is grounded in a kind of stigmatization of the process of giving plasma that dates back to the 1970s and the 1980s. Now, the surveys that I've conducted with my colleague, Bill English, appear to show that a majority of people who give plasma in exchange for compensation indicate that a concern for the well-being of patients or the ability to save a life plays a significant role in their decision to give plasma as well, right? Now, of course, money plays a role too, but they at least indicate that. And this is the information that we use to sort of determine what the motives of blood donors are. There's a famous paper by Dan Ariely looking at the motives of blood donors. And he contends, and there were other co-authors, I can't remember who they were, but he contends that amongst the motives, or perhaps the primary motive for blood donation behavior, is image motivation, or the desire to look good amongst others, which is, strictly speaking, not an altruistic motive. Right? Okay, so if we're going to use that kind of survey data and that kind of data to come to conclusions about the altruism of blood donors, then that same data should be good enough to come to conclusions about people who give plasma and receive compensation for it. If so, then the surveys that I've conducted and the studies that I've done suggest that people are capable of doing both. And it is amusing, as you pointed out, that everybody, everybody that has anything to do with the plasma donor system. So in places where they don't offer compensation to the donor, everyone else is compensated.
Right.
And that's at least, it's a little bit of a head scratcher. It's at least a little bit weird that we should be so hyper focused on whether or not the donor receives a portion of the revenue that comes from the donation process. But we don't ask these questions of the nurses, the phlebotomists, the medical doctors, the people who provide the chairs, the people who build the infrastructure, or the rent that you have to pay, the administrators of the systems. They all make money. But we sort of hyper focus on the donor as though this is, everybody receives the halo from the donation behavior, but only one person, the person whose plasma it is or whose blood it is, they do not participate in the revenue that comes from that process. And we think everything sort of hangs on whether or not the donor receives. And that's puzzling to me, I agree.
Yeah, no, it's that singular focus on that one act that benefits people, that apparently is construed that it shouldn't benefit the donor as well. And it's sort of, if you look at other examples then where you are contending that there's moral superiority associated with a donor that is altruistic or however you want to characterize it, then by the same calculus, a volunteer fireman is morally superior to a fireman who's part of a city firefighting unit that is his or her occupation. And I that doesn't strike me as something that's either true or even intellectually honest. You mentioned teaching and the practice of medicine and so many others that, it's just the thing about donation that's so compelling to some to really put a lot of weight on that act. And I think that too, that there's some issues that we face that a lot of folks aren't really familiar with. For example, is the time that it takes to donate plasma is significantly longer than it takes to donate blood. And from that standpoint alone, you do have to recognize somebody for their commitment, spend time doing that, and going through the apheresis process and going through screening and everything like that. It's significant, and I tend to think that does get lost in the shuffle as well. So, but the other thing that I think tends to get lost in the shuffle, at least not so much in some areas as others perhaps, but are the patients, and the conditions that are treated by the plasma protein therapies that are derived from the donated plasma. They're always serious, sometimes life-threatening, oftentimes without any type of suitable medical substitute. They tend to be complex, they tend to be rare, sometimes hard to understand and obscure. What do you think, what are some of the ways in which people or anyone can sort of understand the magnitude and the seriousness of the conditions that are frequently treated with plasma protein therapies?
I think, it's interesting you asked that question, and I want to get back to your point about volunteer firefighters too. So I just want to make a little mental note about that.
Put a marker down, yeah.
Okay, thank you. How can people become more aware? Sometimes people are not even aware that they're benefiting from a plasma therapy. I was a guest on a television show that a friend of mine, Christine is her name, was hosting, and she wanted me to talk about plasma therapies. And at some point, I don't remember how, we were doing a pre-show conversation on the phone. And it turns out that she used Rh immunoglobulin for her when she was pregnant, and she was unaware that was a plasma therapy. And I wonder just how many people are not aware that they benefit from this therapy. My own nephew, was a triplet, a premature triplet. Garrison is his name. One of the triplets, unfortunately, didn't make it, but Garrison and Summer did. And Garrison has issues with his blood not clotting properly. And it turns out that he relied on a plasma therapy, but they didn't really know that that's what it was. So I think there are cases where people use the products that are prescribed or the products that are given, and people are just unaware of how many people deal with this. I also think that the patient groups have done the best they can. And they've been doing an amazing job of late to publicize these issues, to have a focus on the rare diseases that some of them have in order to communicate with people. But in my experience, and I'm sure it's true of your experience too, it's frustrating. I talk to the media often, and I talk to journalists quite often, and I notice that I have to tell them, listen, you have to speak to a patient. You can't write this article or do this. The latest example of this was the NPR story. They called me for background information, and I was speaking with the reporter, and I told him, you have to speak to the patients. And he said, oh yeah, I guess I should. Of course you should. How can you do a story about plasma? And he's like, well, this is about the collection of plasma, not its distribution. I'm like, you have to talk about the entire path. And so repeatedly when I talk to journalists, I have to remind them that part of this story are the patients. And, in my mind, we should be more patient-centered. One response that I have, going back to the altruism objection to compensating for plasma, is, look, the point of a plasma collection system is to ensure that we have a sufficient amount of plasma for every patient that depends on the medicines that are made from that plasma. The point of a plasma collection system is not to give people an opportunity to behave altruistically, to express their altruism, to provide a space for altruism. That is not the point of a plasma collection system. We need to bear in mind the central point of the system is to ensure that we have enough and to be patient-centered. That doesn't mean that you ignore the donor. Of course you don't ignore the donor, but it's patient-centered, and then the focus on donor safety is right up there. Like, you can't collect plasma unless it's safe for the donor and safe for the eventual end user, the patient that needs it.
Yeah.
But this focus on patients needs to be, I think it needs to be brought to the fore. I don't like the way that many journalists and many media outlets, the way that they focused on this issue or what they choose to focus on without oftentimes talking to patients at all.
Yeah, as if plasma collection was its own cause alone, right?
Right.
Where it doesn't make any sense to talk about it in isolation, really. So
right, and you understand, like, what are the motives of the donors? Are they altruistic? How do we ensure that we have enough altruism? That's focused on the donor side. It's on the plasma collection side. But what is this for?
Right.
What are we collecting plasma for?
Yeah.
It's almost like people forget that that's the point.
So
the point of medicine is to heal the sick.
Right.
It is not to give people an opportunity to have a really prestigious job like medical doctor or nurse.
Right.
It's not a jobs program. It's a heal the sick program. Plasma collection is not a jobs program. It's not, providing spaces for altruism for you and me to demonstrate to others that we care about others. Right. It's to ensure that patients have the medicine that they need.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, the ultimate demonstration of that really would be a system in which you can assure that clinical need is being met. And that would be the ultimate test of any type of ethical question or moral quandary or whatever. But I think, what you're saying here certainly would resonate with a lot of folks, and, undoubtedly with patient groups and with many working in the industry and others who understand how the industry works. But what do you think are some of the things that resonate more in your experience in talking about these issues? What are some of the things that you've noticed that whenever you've said them, they're like, yeah, that one really landed?
You mean in terms of the discussions that I've had with people? Yeah. And do you mean what sorts of arguments have I presented that have been successful, or?
Yeah, what's your sense of things that really seem to move and motivate on these issues?
Yeah, the core of this are the patients.
Yeah.
You need people to empathize and to sympathize with the situation of patients. You have patients who rely on immunoglobulin. There is no alternative to immunoglobulin for many patients. Right? We have recombinant, we have clotting factors, we have alternatives to that. We don't really have alternatives for many of the plasma therapies. And getting people to realize that sometimes people's lives depend on that, that's the most important. But I should note that the people who object to the compensation of plasma, I was surprised by this. This seems to be what you might describe as a kind of elite concern.
Mm.
So it's a concern that is expressed by, first of all, I found it surprising. So I've since I wrote that letter defending the idea of compensating people for bone marrow donation, I've subsequently participated in writing 2 other letters aimed at the Senate of Canada and Canada more broadly. And I found it surprising that professional philosophers' response to this is to agree with me.
Mm.
I say surprising. I should not have been surprised. The position of a majority of professional ethicists that I've spoken to is that compensating people for plasma is perfectly okay. There are questions about the frequency of plasma donation that you allow. There are questions about how much people are compensated for donating plasma. Those are relevant questions that professional ethicists worry about. But in general, they say, that there's not really a significant issue. And also, if you take a look at surveys of public opinion, if you look at public opinion polls on this, I conducted one public opinion survey in Canada. Over 60% of respondents said to my question, which was, is it morally appropriate to pay people for plasma donations? More than 60% said yes. there have been 3 such surveys of Canadian opinion. And in all 3 of those, the number of people who thought it was perfectly morally appropriate or okay to compensate people for plasma were all of them over 60%. One of them was over 70%. One of those public opinion polls was conducted by Canadian Blood Services themselves.
Yeah.
So I think that in general, the public is perfectly okay with compensating people for plasma, for bone marrow, and so on. But there are certain kinds of journalists in certain kinds of places, and there are elites in certain kinds of, there are elites who disapprove of it, and they write the newspaper articles. So
Yeah.
that's my attitude to it.
Well, you mentioned the survey work that you had done, and you mentioned earlier the work that you and Bill English were undertaking. Is there anything more specific that you want to share? Is there anything that you can sort of put out there? I know that you've spoken about the findings, preliminary findings, a couple of times. So I wanted to see if you had anything that you wanted to add about that, or something.
Yeah, sure.
Breaking.
So the paper is available publicly on SSRN. I'm happy to share the paper where it is right now with anyone who would like. For people who are not part of the peer review process, it takes years to publish an article, but the data is available for anyone to peruse and to look at. And what we found is that the introduction of compensated plasma opportunities in Canada and the United States did not have a negative effect on uncompensated blood collections, right? For that part of the paper, we looked at 3 cities in Canada that saw the introduction of widespread plasma collection. This is Winnipeg, Saskatoon, and Moncton, New Brunswick. There were also 3 cities in the United States that saw the introduction of compensated plasma opportunities around the same time. And in none of those cities did we see a decrease in blood donation behavior. We also had a data set of very many American cities. We're talking about thousands and thousands and thousands of blood donors and plasma donors. And we found again that the parallel operation, that is, side-by-side operation of plasma collection with compensation, blood donation without compensation, it had no effect on blood donation behavior. So like I said, that paper is available publicly. We are hoping to have that paper published in a peer-reviewed economics journal sometime very soon. But I will say that even anecdotally, I know that there are many people who have expressed this concern. Canadian Blood Services expressed this concern back in 2016 or 2017. They expressed this concern, but have since said that nothing's happening in Saskatoon. Similarly, in the United States, I know the American Red Cross has expressed this worry about the growth in plasma collection centers in the United States, but we haven't really seen anything. And if you look at the Czech Republic, which allowed commercial,
the Czech Republic,
the Czech Republic is an unbelievable place, and much of the data is available publicly. I invite people to take a look. I forget what it's called, but they have a government organization that collects the data on the blood collection side as well as on the plasma collection side in the nonprofit sector. And for 1 year, the first year of operations, I want to say it was 2006 or 2007, the commercial plasma centers sent their data to that central government body that collects the data, and they published it. Since then, they haven't. They've withheld that data. I'm trying to get access to that particular data. But the aggregate, the general theme is that over 3 years, plasma collection in the country of the Czech Republic went up 700% with no impact on blood donations.
Yeah. And, I can certainly understand the concerns that the blood collectors would have with this, particularly, right now, I know that a lot of blood banks are concerned about their blood supplies and everything like that. So I think that it's important, to donate blood, plasma, just to donate everything that you feel capable of donating and will allow you to continue to be healthy after it. And, we've discussed enough, I think, already, sort of the broad spectrum of why people would donate, I think that encouraging donation in all forms is an important thing to do. we certainly don't want to see our patient community that we serve as the industry, being jeopardized or slightly endangered even by any type of policy that would serve to limit access and also to defray us from getting to appropriate what's clinically needed for a population. So I hope that we can see some of these policies changed and move forward. But as we pull into the landing space here, we appear to be coming up on the end of this part of the pandemic anyway. I know you've been cooped up. We've all been cooped up, for better or for worse, for a long time now. So what are your post-pandemic plans? Have you already started or engaged in the? I see the sartorial elegance is continuing. So
family and friends. That's the plan for post-pandemic.
Yeah.
My mom and dad live in Poland. My sister lives in Amsterdam. Of course, since I'm Canadian, many of my best friends live in Canada. My closest friend gave birth to a beautiful baby. Coraline is her name.
Congratulations.
And I haven't, thank you, yes. And well, on their behalf, I'll accept that. Congratulations. Yeah. And I've only ever seen her via FaceTime. And so the plan after the pandemic and once people are allowed to cross the border into Canada and return to the United States, I'd like to go visit them. I'd like to fly out to Spain again. I had an opportunity to teach in Spain at ESADE in Barcelona on exchange. This was 2 summers ago. I missed that opportunity this summer. I'm hoping to have a chance to go to Spain, maybe at the end of this fall, maybe at the beginning of winter, and then to do a bit of a European trip to go see my mom and dad, my sister, and others. Those are the plans.
Well, here's to hoping that we can go forward with all of our plans and coming out the other end of the tunnel. So I just want to thank you so much, Dr. Jaworski. Appreciate your time. Appreciate all of the insight. Keep doing what you do. And, I'm sure we'll be talking again in the near future. And I'm sure we'll have you as a guest in future channels of communication, whether it's at a meeting or another podcast or a webinar. It's going to be coming up. So appreciate all your writing and certainly your insight. And I think that there's a lot of folks in the patient community and certainly within the industry that appreciate it as well. And bringing light to the idea that what they do is important. And I think a long time ago, you expressed to me the knowledge or your feeling that this industry is a noble one and for what's done. And, certainly everybody that works in the industry appreciates that as well and appreciates your words in an effort to help people understand what we're all about.
Well, I appreciate the appreciation, Dr. Penrod. Thank you for saying that. It means a lot to me. And I do want to emphasize that I do think that the industry serves a patient community, and not just in the United States and Germany and Austria, in Hungary and in the Czech Republic, but the world over. Right? This is an industry that supplies nearly 70% of the plasma used around the world. So, as a Canadian, Canada is more than 80% dependent on the people who give plasma in the United States. We just had World Blood Donor Week. And how many times do other countries express gratitude to American plasma donors? The answer is awfully close to 0. And yet, more than half of most countries' plasma therapy supply is made with donations that come from the United States. And I think it's important to emphasize gratitude in that case. And I think it's important to express appreciation for that as well. So on behalf of Canada, I guess, thank you.
Thank you too, Peter. We'll talk again soon, I'm sure. Be well.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.